Hi, everybody, and thank you for listening to another installment of SAF's podcast. We're here today with Brett Butler, who is one of the authors on an article coming out in the November 2016 issue of the Journal of Forestry. The paper is called Family Forest Ownership of the United States, 2013, Findings from the USDA Forest Service's National Woodland Owner Survey. Welcome to the podcast, Brett.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Okay, so Brett, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I actually grew up in suburban Connecticut, not in a state that's actually known for its forestry, but that's actually where I did get turned on to the woods, and that's created my lifelong passion of being interested in the woods, and as it turns out later on, woodland owners themselves. I went to undergraduate at the University of Connecticut, where I graduated in 1995 with a degree in natural resource management engineering. When I was there, I got exposed to forestry as a profession, and I got exposed to the whole idea about research. I actually started off in tropical ecology, but eventually made my way back to the United States. Following my work at the University of Connecticut, I was an on-site science coordinator at a private preserve, and so got lots of experience with different types of science, different scientists, and different exposure. After I was there, I realized I wanted to see a different part of the world, and so I actually did my doctorate work out at Oregon State University. There's where I really started to concentrate on looking at the interactions between people and the forest. At the time, the term human dimensions wasn't really widely used, but in theory, that's really what I was studying at the time. Following that, I started my career with the U.S. Forest Service in around 2000. I work for the U.S. Forest Service's Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, where I'm in charge of the National Woodland Owner Survey. In 2006, I relocated to Amherst, Massachusetts, where I'm currently located, and myself and David Kittredge, we started up something called the Family Forest Research Center.
Sounds like a very varied background. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, Brett, can you tell us in a few sentences about the highlights of your research in this paper for the Journal of Forestry?
So this is part of a continuing project that we've been doing for a while called the National Woodland Owner Survey. On a periodic basis, we go out and we survey a random set of family forest owners from across the United States. One of the major findings is something that we've known for a while, but I think is just incredibly important, and that's basically that family forest owners rule. When we look across the whole United States, there's no other ownership group that owns as much land as family forest owners. They own 36% of the forest land across the United States, nearly 300 million acres. The next largest group is the federal group, but family forest owners in total own even more than them. And then actually when we start to look at different parts of the country, we can see that that percentage is even much greater. When we look in the eastern United States, most of the states have over 50% of their forest land owned by families and individuals, and there's a number of states that have over 75%. And so this is incredibly important to understand family forest owners. Some of the results that we're looking at from the survey that we talk about in the article, one is just looking at size of forest holdings. About 62% of the family forest ownerships, and in total there's 11 million of them, 62% of this 11 million own relatively small parcels, 1 to 9 acres. But if instead of looking at ownerships, we look at total number of acres owned, the numbers really flip. Looking at family forest ownerships of 100 or more acres, they own 56% of the forest land. And so a very different way of looking at it. Another thing that's very important is trying to understand why they own their land. And this is something, too, that we've known for a while, but we're starting to hone in on this a little bit better about what their primary objectives are. Beauty, privacy, wildlife, and nature, that's what we primarily find, which can be a little bit of anathema compared to what we learn in traditional forestry schools. Landowners are not out there thinking about timber on a regular basis as many foresters are. And so to understand these landowners, understand how to communicate with them and help them, this is really important to understand how they view the world. And so again, the beauty, the privacy, the wildlife, and nature are what really are paramount to them. Most family forest owners are not engaged in their land, at least engagement as defined by sort of traditional forestry metrics. Only about 13% of the family forest ownerships have a written forest management plan. Only about 20% have received advice in the last 5 years. And these landowners landowners, they're great stewards of the land. They have this great love of this land, but they're not really connected. And so that's a really important thing that we have to understand is how can we connect with these landowners? How can we engage with them in a more substantive way? Looking at the demographics of the landowners, I think, is also very important, where we see that nearly half of them are 65 or older. One of the important things about that is that indicates that these lands will be transferring to the next generation in the not-too-distant future. And how can we help these landowners make a good, strong transfer so that their strong land ethics can go on to the next generation and these lands continue to be well stewarded? Overall, family forests are doing really well. We have a lot of family forest land that's out there. People are trying to do great things with it, but there's a lot more, and there are obviously a lot of threats to these lands as well. One of the interesting trends that I think we found was related to female family forest owners, and we're actually seeing a fairly large uptick in the percentage of ownerships that are owned by women. Back in 2006, the previous National Woodland Owner Survey, the percentage was around 11%, and now in 2013, it's about 22%. And so this indicates that there are obviously more women who have a primary decision-making role. One reason this is happening is that many of these lands are initially owned by a couple, a man and a woman. Very often the man will die before the woman, and the woman is left with these lands. That's not how it always happens, but it's one of the common storylines. So then we start thinking about, okay, what are the different decisions that these different people are making? Maybe when it was owned as a couple, maybe the man was making the forest management decisions, but maybe it'd be the woman who makes the ultimate decisions about how these lands will be passed on. And so we're trying to think a little bit more about how can we engage particularly with these female family forest owners. And there are some really neat programs out there that are happening related to that. The other piece that I think is very interesting that we're starting to pick up on more is a generational shift. And that's related to these landowners being relatively advanced in age. This is something that's always been going on. We've always been seeing this cycle from one generation of owners to the next. That's just part of life. But initially when I started this research, I was thinking, okay, so it starts, people are old, then people who are young will acquire it. That's not quite how it works. People who are old have it, and then people who are younger acquire it. And younger, they might already be old. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of people in the silent generation getting rid of their land and it's going on to their children's generation, who are now the baby boomers. Maybe it stays in the family, maybe it goes outside of the family, and actually most of the land does go outside of the family. And so we're seeing the shift, though, from the silent generation to the baby boomers, and eventually we're going to see it shift down to millennials and Generation X. And each of these generations have different ways of viewing these lands and different services that they expect from professionals such as foresters. So some other interesting trends that we're monitoring, Jennifer.
Well, thank you. It's definitely something that non-foresters like me don't really think that much about. So I'm wondering then, Brett, what made you decide to pursue this specific research, or what about this topic resonated with you that made you want to explore and dig a little deeper?
So that really goes back to when I started my first passion, and my first passion was just kind of the forest and trees in general. And as I mentioned, it started off actually in tropical ecology. I was fortunate enough to go down to Costa Rica for a summer and work on some secondary tropical forests. And that did a couple of very important things for me. One, it really turned me on to research. I realized that this is something I have a passion for. It solidified that forests are something that I just have a natural affinity for. I just feel very at peace, and I know that forests are incredibly important for water, for air, for wildlife, for all these great things. But what really happened is I realized that if you're interested in the woods, you need to be interested in who controls the fate of these woods. And in most circumstances, those are people. And so once I returned from there, that's when I started getting much more interested in trying to understand the future of the forest and, again, understanding who controls it, and those are the people. In the United States, that really means family forest owners. So they are incredibly important, so that's one thing. Two, they're also incredibly inspiring. And so talking to these landowners is just a phenomenal privilege that I have. Many of these conversations are inspirational. Some of them are also incredibly sad. I very often start crying on the phones with the landowners. They tell me about somebody who is dying, somebody who, they want to pass it on to the next generation, but they're not able to do it. They tell me a story about, I sold my wood for this much, and I know it's worth a whole lot more than that. So that's frustrating. But it also provides a great impetus to keep doing this work. And so trying to understand the landowners, trying to help them help the woods is what really resonates very strongly with me.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense. You mentioned just now that forest owners are incredibly important. Can you tell me more about why family forest owners matter?
They matter for a couple of reasons, and it all depends on sort of which perspective you want to look at it from. First, I was very confused. Do I work for the forest or do I work for the owners? I work for the U.S. Forest Service. We're interested in both, but this dialectic is very confusing to try and understand. If you're interested in the forest, you need to be interested in those who control the fate of the forest,